Of course, in an age of 21st century and an information war, an info war, it's not all about nuclear weapons and military weapons. In large part, you begin to think about things like technological backdoors, things like we were talking about before, big data, psychological warfare, psychometric warfare, psychographical warfare. And in fact, just in the last few days, I ran into this, it was a certain division of the IDF Operations Directorate that's actually titled the Center for Consciousness Operations. Isn't that interesting? We talk about psyops, so if it's consciousness operation, we could talk about con ops. And isn't that a perfect way of thinking about some of these ways that the social media landscape is creating a new man or new woman in a certain way? And I brought up this idea of psychological warfare, psychographical warfare, and psychometric warfare. And in a certain way, the idea of the different deep states, and Israel obviously would have what you might term the deep Jewish state component to it. They are very much interested in the idea of rhetorical warfare, and thinking back into Aristotle's version of rhetoric and these three normally conceived categories of logos, ethos, and pathos, where logos is the idea of the power of the word and the power of logic, and of course that's where we get psychological warfare, and warfare that's sort of coming down from on high, that's scripted, that has a certain type of language or logic to it. Sometimes it's based on the truth and it's facts that are skewed in a certain way. You would call that gray propaganda, but sometimes it's a logic that's either illogical or that it's based on false grammar. If you're thinking about the trivium, a false factual set that would be called black propaganda. But then you also have ethos, the second category of rhetoric, that is not necessarily related to our idea of ethics, although in a certain way I do think it comes out of that. But ethos in the ancient Greek tradition, in terms of a speaker's effectiveness or ability to reach an audience, had to do with their connection, their understanding of the culture or the society, or the understanding of the audience, the ethos of the audience, and their ability to express that. Also their background, whether they had cred in modern parlance, whether they had street cred. And in a certain way, you could then put that into the idea of psychographical warfare, which I previously described as sort of an emanation of something like social media, Facebook. So it's your social, it's your psychosocial graph, which is your community, how you like to be seen by the people that you relate with. And this, of course, relates to what we were talking about before in terms of new groupings, new alternative, alt-right ways of conceiving a political group that represents a new approach to a problem, reaction, and solution, or certain left ideologies whether it's something like, of course, like identity politics is a good example of where people want to consider the way that they're looked at. Virtue signaling, that whole idea, I think, plays into the idea of psychographical warfare. But then third and finally, there's the rhetorical category of pathos, the idea of the emotion, the appeal to emotions, and the idea of what triggers you. That'd probably be the modern word, triggering, right? And so then I believe that that's related to psychometric warfare. And so something looping back to Cambridge Analytica that claims that it has thousands of data points, a lot of it based on using all kinds of data points illegally, apparently, too, or against the rules in terms of Amazon Web Services, apparently, but also across Facebook and the massive corporate commercialized data points that have been developed by Facebook on their user base. You could then see that something like Cambridge Analytica has thousands of data points that not only relate to whose posts are you sharing, and this, of course, is related to the whole idea of the accusations of fake news and what is credible and stories that get passed along and dark posts that don't get recognized and that type of thing. But then also psychometrical warfare, where they have data points about what you're specifically interested in, or what triggers you, or what sets you off. And of course, Facebook then introduced things beyond just the sort of thumbs up like. They begin to introduce a little bit wider range of emotional faces for you to then click, that would then give them data that ultimately is apparently ended up in a large scale con ops, consciousness operations warfare outfit like Cambridge Analytica, where they have data points on the specific things that can trigger you in certain ways. And so I would call that the emanation of psychometrical warfare of some point, that it's based on the metrics that you've provided for yourself. And then just finally, I would add that there's a fourth category of rhetoric that's usually forgotten about, and it's called Kairos, which is it's a different type of time. Linear time or metrical time is considered in Greek philosophy as chronos. But Kairos is the idea of context or the moment, and the literal definitions of it are very interesting, and people should go look it up. It has something to do like the moment where you have a chance to push it on through. So I would say that this fourth category of rhetoric opens up possibilities for us, where we understand our context, both in terms of history, but also in terms of social context, where there are possibilities that maybe we didn't think of before, and that are outside of these three well-worn, warfared categories of logos, ethos, and pathos, and looking for these openings for actions that maybe have not been considered before. And of course, this is also the idea of the realm of improvisation. And in the ancient rhetorical arts, really that was why you studied and set up memory palaces, so you could know your arguments, and you could know all of your grammar, logic, and rhetorical devices. But then the best rhetoricians were those that recognize opportunities in the moment, like the best jazz musician or even classical musician who was riffing on a certain mode.